It feels like nobody can make sense of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. He is running around the world meeting with dictators claiming to be on a peace mission. But even that depends on who you ask. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. We're going to try to get to the bottom of the Hungarian Prime Minister. Let's get into it. Okay, so for this, I'm utilizing today's sponsor, Ground News. And you guys that are fans of the channel know that I use Ground News basically all the time. And because they're great. I don't know what else to tell you. They're a great source of information on this conflict, right? So we're taking a look here at this particular story, and this really illustrates why I use Ground News for almost all the Ukraine stories I cover. And it's because, well, it's really hard to make sense of the media landscape, right? Take a look at this story. Look at all these different headlines. You can see this is, according to the bias distribution chart, this story is covered by left, center, and right-leaning media. But when you see how it's covered, you'll see just how absurdly different it is. Notice here, the right of center sources emphasizing the fact that it's a peace visit. Some of them, right, here's one that says uses his own quote saying it's a peace mission 3.0 in Beijing. Hungarian PM Orban says he appreciates the Chinese peace initiative for Ukraine. So you can see there's a big emphasis on peace, including Russian state media source, which is, again, I always appreciate the Ground News just tags it right there. Yo, it's government of Russia. So we know that this is a reflection of the government of Russia's actual stance, right? Which is actually, this is framed in a fairly neutral way. Xi Jinping meets Viktor Orban in Beijing. But when you look at how left of center sources are covering it, it's a totally different story, right? There's a real emphasis on Orban's relationship to other dictators, and almost none of these involve references to his peace mission. You could see here it's put in quotation marks, meant to emphasize that it's his words, a peace mission, but it's a tremendously different way of framing this kind of trip. And it can be hard to get to the bottom of it, right? The best coverage, at least that I found, is actually a fairly neutral source. This is the Government of Ireland's official media accounts. But you notice that they are tagged as being extremely neutral and highly factual. Let's see if we can pull it up here. Right, here we go. Government of Ireland, highly factual and centrist. And frankly, given that this is a European issue, the Government of Ireland probably is going to cover it fairly well. And they open up with the fact that the United States said it was concerned by Orban's meeting with Xi Jinping to discuss Ukraine, but added that it didn't appear to have brought any meaningful results. This is a direct quote from John Kirby. Quote, "It doesn't seem to be productive in terms of trying to get things done in Ukraine," and added, "It's concerning." Now, why is this concerning? Because this is part of a larger dictators, for lack of a better term, dictators alliance, right? Orban is notable that he, in some ways, is, well, trying to consolidate his power and to create a kind of Putin-like regime. You can see his dictatorship efforts have been ratcheted up for some time. Here's from 2 years ago. You can see he instituted a state of emergency, locking in his hold on power, right? He stacked his parliamentary elections to ensure he always wins. And this is a standard kind of dictatorship type behavior. And the fact that he is out there cavorting around with Putin and Xi Jinping, two dictators who have very similar playbooks, right? They maintain the trappings of an independent, almost democratic system, but they miss the key part where it's actually competitive. That's what makes democratic systems work, is competing parties with competing philosophies on government, right? And Viktor Orban is just not one of those people. There's no realistic way he's going to be losing his next election in Hungary, just like Xi Jinping is not going to be losing his next election. But it doesn't mean that these guys aren't here together. And you notice that Orban and Zelensky also had a meeting some time ago. But as we talked about earlier, there's a reason Orban is framing this as a peace mission 3.0. And that reason is that peace mission 1.0 and 2.0 were abject failures, right? Zelensky didn't really soften his stance in any way on negotiating peace with Russia or achieving a ceasefire. Putin, for his part, met with Orban and then immediately announced he would never engage in a ceasefire. He had no interest in a truce or ceasefire. So to say that Orban is probably running around making things worse is not an understatement, right? But of course, again, if you didn't get this if you only got your news from a right-wing source, you might think he's actually making progress, that his 3.0 peace mission is actually going somewhere. So if you're interested in supporting Ground News and getting access to this wealth of analysis of these news sources, you can definitely use my code. It's in the QR code that we're going to stick in there. It's also linked in the description. You'll get 40% off their Premium Vantage subscription, which is a phenomenal deal. That's a better discount than I think I've ever seen them offer. And one other cool feature about Ground News is they've also got what's called a blind spot. Blind spot is their feature that lets you see stories that are completely ignored by one side or another. So you could see here that right-wing sources are completely ignoring a story about Pennsylvania middle schoolers who systematically impersonated their teachers on TikTok. If you haven't seen that story, it's kind of wild and frankly a little disturbing, and probably ignored by the right. Honestly, I'm not even sure. I think of the right as usually being someone who's anti-social media and anti-public schools, but I think maybe a position defending public school teachers is something right of center sources don't particularly like. Whereas the left is ignoring apparently a white nationalist group marching through Nashville. That's wild and sort of weird that, again, the left of center sources are just sort of burying this. Really bizarre stuff, but you wouldn't even know it. You wouldn't even hear these stories. These are new to me if you didn't have the blind spot analysis. And they actually do it for any particular issue. So you can literally search for Ukraine war and it'll give you the blind spots around that story specifically. Here you go. You can see right here, the left ignoring that Russia is studying an intact ATACMS missile, and the right is not really talking about Biden's focus on this week's NATO summit. But important stories, definitely the NATO summit for sure. So guys, that's really all I had for today. A huge thank you to Ground News for sponsoring today's video. And if you want to check out Ground News, right, founded by a NASA engineer, compiling over 50,000 independent news sources, you can take a look at the link in the description or go to ground.news/combatveteran, which will get you 40% off their Vantage plan, which gets you unlimited access to all the stories and all the analysis tools that I use to help discern fact from propaganda. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.